episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Okay, as always, a big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show, commented, liked, and all that kind of stuff. You know, it's really appreciated, and obviously, yeah, I enjoy seeing the comments as long as they're not being rude. More often than not, they're not, so it's not a huge issue, and I always try and reply to them. So this week. This week's episode of the show is, I would say, new releases from A.D Rattray, but they were new back in April, and it just goes to show how much of a backlog I kind of have with episodes of the show that, you know, these have been sat around for 4 months. Once you've been saying that, I've got boxes full of samples that have been sat around for a damn sight longer, I can tell you that. And every now and again I'll go for a rummage and go, ooh, that's kind of evaporated, can't really use that, can I? But obviously we don't have a problem with evaporation after just a few months of hanging around here. So yeah, not really a great deal to say. I've done several episodes of the show on A.D Rattray's bottlings, and I just thought it was about time to take a look at these ones, as there's some interesting stuff here. So let's just take a look at the lineup. Right, okay, we're going to kick off with a 10-year-old Glenburgie. This was distilled in 2008, obviously bottled this year. Single bourbon hogshead, number 800-356. Now you're probably going, Glen who? It's not a particularly well-known malt. It's owned by, the distillery is owned by Pernod Ricard or Shivers. It just all goes into Ballantine's at the end of the day, and to be bluntly honest with you, it's a pretty unremarkable malt. It can be quite pleasantly crisp and Speyside-y, or it can be downright industrial, and then you have a large swathe of them that are really quite average, innocuous. It's a filler at the end of the day, isn't it, really? I mean, you know, you could probably take the thing out of Ballantine's and you probably wouldn't notice it had disappeared. And but anyway, obviously A.D Rattray seem to love Glenburgie. It's often appears in their lists. So anyway, we'll give it the benefit of the doubt, you know, because as you know, single cask can be, you know, interesting, or they can follow exactly what you would expect. But anyway, bottling number 2 is a 12-year-old Teaninich. Yes, 12-year-old Teaninich. I've got it written down as 11 years old, but actually no, it's 12 years old. So this was distilled in 2007 and bottled in 2019. Single bourbon cask. Don't know whether it's a hoggy or a barrel. Number 459, bottled at 58.2%. And again, it's another one of those spirits that Teaninich can be really nice, grassy, citric, fresh, or it can be quite as dull as ditch water at the end of the day. So again, it'll be interesting to see where that one lies. Incidentally, the ABV for the Glenburgie is a not inconsiderable 59.8. Ooh, cask strength whiskies before lunch. Ooh, lovely. Bottling number 3 is a 10-year-old Miltonduff. This is been distilled in 2008. Bottled at 60.9, would you believe? Is it me, or do ABVs seem to be getting increasingly higher? Mind you, I mean, it is because there's a lot of younger whiskey being bottled by the independents, but it just seems to me that, you know, high 50s is sort of like de rigueur now for cask strength whiskies, to be honest with you. But anyway, so this is a Miltonduff. It's 10 years old, bourbon barrel, 701-221, bottled at 60.9%. And Miltonduff can be a lovely whiskey. I've always enjoyed Miltonduff. I mean, yeah, right, you get the occasional bland and awful bottling, but more often than not, it's pleasantly honeyed, it's heathery, it's got that sort of kind of, you know, real heathery, sort of gorse, highlandy kind of character. You can just sort of imagine, you know, yomping over the gorse with a dram of that in your hand, you know. But anyway, so that's that bottling. Next bottling we'll be looking at is a 13-year-old Tomintoul, distilled in 2005. Another shrinking violet at 60%. I mean, lordy, that was a bit of a tight cask, it has to be said. It's a sherry butt, number 11, and yeah, it's 60%. Ooh, good job. My butt is quite full, as they say. Ha ha. Penultimate bottling we'll be looking at is a 7-year-old. Yeah, it's a 7-year-old. It's a 7-year-old Glentauchers, and this was distilled in 2011. Again, this is a shrinking violet. This is just 59%, and it spent 5 years in a sherry butt for number 425 before being finished for 2 years in an ex-Lagitana hoggy. So it's been sherry matured and then sherry finished. Ooh, don't think we're going to get a lot of distillery character out of that one, are we, Toto? Yeah, so there you go. That's like I said, 5 years in a butt and then a further 2 years in hoggy. Right, well, it could be interesting, could defy logic entirely, but I think it's probably unlikely. But you know, if it could be a nice sherry monster, you never know. And the last bottling is something with a bit of age, thank God. No peat today, unfortunately, but something with a bit of age. This is a 30-year-old Glen Grant in their vintage cask collection. It again is a single sherry cask, 9173, distilled in 1988 and obviously bottled this year at the slightly lower ABV of 54.8%. Now, it's quite nice to see an old Glen Grant. They used to be quite ubiquitous in the independent bottlings, but I would guess over the last 10 years you just don't see old Glen Grant anymore. I mean, whether that's because the distillery is, you know, not selling casks, which could well be true, or they're just not being released. You know, independents are kind of sitting on these casks, thinking, "Yep, well, we'll wait until it's got some lovely age because it ages really nicely," and then out it comes, nice packaging, 3 figures, and you hope it's really, really good. So anyway. So there you go. This is the April releases from A.D Rattray, and I think we'll kick off with a bit of Glenburgie. Right. Okay. So let's see what the nose gives us on this one, then, shall we? Quite alcoholic. Quite an alcohol prickle, which is not a surprise. Pretty young, gristy, barleyed, herbal, high-toned, bit of white fruit, bit of almost kind of juniper kind of character. A little bit of honeysuckle. Yeah, a bit of touch of the sort of the wort about it. I mean, it's okay. It's a pleasant nose. It's like I said, it's got quite an alcohol prickle, so you know, you can't really go sort of sniffing too hard, but when you do, you get kind of, you notice the alcohol. It's got a little bit of an earthiness. I mean, I suppose it has a very natural kind of feel to it, and yeah, I suppose you could say it's edging towards the sort of the crisper end of the Spey spectrum, and it's not unpleasant. See what the palate's like. My God, that's young, and alcoholic. Right, it's a bit fuller on the palate. There's a bit more oak character. I'm getting sort of toasty oak, toffee, a little bit of barley. It's pretty straightforward stuff at the end of the day. I mean, there's a bit of citrus on the end. It's got again a real sort of almost junipery, spirity kind of finish to it. I mean, it's not an unpleasant spirity finish. It's just a youthful spirity finish. It's, I wouldn't say disconnected, but it's kind of like, you know, oak kind of like goes mid palate-ish sort of. Then you get the spirit kind of coming through it. So it's a sort of a bit of a stop-start progression, I suppose, if you like. And it doesn't really have a great deal of complexity. It's average, I guess you would say. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just kind of, like I said, kind of a classic filler. It just tastes like a whiskey at the end of the day. Let's put a little drop of water with it and see what happens. Momentary cloudiness. Let's see what the nose gives us now. I mean, the nose is actually quite pleasant, I would say. I mean, it's kind of brought out the citrus notes. I'm getting more lemon, getting a little bit more barley, and a touch of granulated sugar as well. So, I mean, for a 10-year-old, that nose is pleasant. You know, it's a little bit more. I suppose the issue is that it sort of shows more complexity on the nose than it does on the palate. So when you actually get to taste it, you're sort of a little bit disappointed by the lack of complexity. Anyway, let's see what the palate's like now. That's got a nice orangey aftertaste, sort of granulated sugar coated orange. Again, it's relatively straightforward, as I think water has certainly helped it. It's certainly not added to any great deal of complexity, apart from it's given it a bit of a finish now, obviously by dropping off some of the alcohol. And like I said, it's got that pleasant orangey kind of finish. Granulated sugar, a bit more barley, maybe a touch fresher, a little bit less oak. On the whole, I mean, it is not a bad bottling at all, and certainly, like I said, I think adding a little drop of water to it certainly sort of made that a more interesting whiskey. So yeah, not a bad starter, I think. Right, okay, so let's move on to the 12-year-old Teaninich. Let's see what the nose gives us on this thing, shall we? Crisp, citric, barley, straw, a touch of hard barley, just a sort of an intimation of industrial barley, some oiliness, some oily grilled nuts, apricot. Yeah, the more I kind of nose this, the more the sort of the natural oils are kind of coming out, and it's kind of bringing with it that sort of slightly marry kind of youthfulness, as opposed to sort of like an exuberant citric youthfulness, which is what I got kind of straight off the bat. I mean, again, it's not a bad nose. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. No off notes, nothing. I mean, yes, all right. There's a little bit of an industrial note, but you can kind of forgive it that. Ultimately, not hugely exciting, it has to be said, but well made. So it pals right now. Again, pretty simple stuff, citrus, apricot, straw, barley. I would say probably the palate is a touch cleaner, masked. I mean, although the alcohol isn't as kind of prevalent and noticeable as it was in the Glenburgie, it's still kind of you know, makes the finish very short. There's maybe a little bit of spice on the aftertaste, and it does start to get a little oily and industrial, and I'm guessing that you would probably, if that had been maybe given another couple of years maybe in cask, that may well have just sort of mitigated that slight oily industrial character. Let's put a little drop of water with it and see what that does. Now that's brought out the citrus, it's brought out a nice green apple and some more sugar notes. It's kind of more as I would expect Teaninich to be. It's got that fresh, crisp, appley, grassy kind of character. The oak is still there, and so is the oiliness, but it's a little bit more compressed and not quite so forthright in its character, shall we say. Yeah, so it feels like. Again, it's brought out some citrus, some apple. It's still slightly industrial, slightly oily. Little bit of faintiness right on the finish. And to me, like I said, I think if that had maybe a couple more years in cask, you might just have sort of got shot of that sort of oily, slightly fainty note. And that's me being probably a little bit more pedantic than some people probably are, I guess. And I imagine if I was doing cask selection for an independent, I'd probably go, no, more time in the cask for that one, more time in the cask for that one. Ooh, we haven't got anything we can release. And sometimes that's not a bad thing in my personal opinion. It's like, you know, don't release the stuff until it's really ready for releasing. But yes, obviously I realise that there's a commercial angle that has to be taken into account. But at the end of the day, I think personally for that one, I would have just left it for a little while longer in the cask and just seen how that developed. So it's not like it was going to suddenly become overly oaked or suddenly become, you know, fall apart or anything like that. It's only 12 years old, so you know, a couple of more years ain't going to make a great deal of, well, I mean, it would make a difference, if you see what I mean. But I'm going to shut up now and move on to the next one. Okay, so let's move on to the Miltonduff. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Oak. Now, if this wasn't a first fill, probably not quite first fill, I would have thought. But nevertheless a pretty active cask. It's very bourbony and getting that kind of very grainy kind of dried fruit. To be honest with you, I mean, if I was nosing this blind, I might actually thought it was a grain whiskey rather than a malt. Yeah, I'm getting charred oak, I'm getting a bit of spirit. I'm not getting any real distillery character. There's no honey, there's no heather, there's no bracken, there's no sort of gorse, there's none of that at all. It is essentially spirit oak. That's pretty much about all you're getting. Yeah, I mean, if you like that sort of thing, you know, floats your boat, then you know, fine. God, it really is getting coconutty now. And I suppose if this was a grain whiskey, I'd probably go, yeah, okay, I like all that American oak kind of character. I like the balance between the dried fruit and the oak. But it's not, it's a malt. It's from Miltonduff, and it sure as hell doesn't have any distillery character. Anyway, let's see what the power's like. Gritty, coffee, toffee, coconut, charred oak, alcohol, I mean, it's 60.9 for God's sake. But I'll tell you what, you wouldn't have known that from the nose. I mean, it was, I'll give it that, the alcohol is all very well contained and integrated, but oak, oak, and more oak, and no distillery character, and which, frankly, after sort of nosing it, I'm not surprised. It's not bad. It's not bad whiskey. Again, you know, but it has no distillery character whatsoever. It's all about the oak, and if you like that, then fine. Okay, there's a touch of lemon now. It's a little fresher, but it's still quite coconutty, still quite nutty, charred. And again, I just can't get past all that oak. That there really isn't anything other than that. See what parts I know. Yeah, it's a touch of barley maybe, but again, it's pretty much oak. It's softer, it's more charred, but like I said, at the end of the day, that you wouldn't know what distillery that came from, and I need to know that. I need to know that in my whiskey. You know, yeah, it's all well and good having lots of oak character, and I like oak character, but it's exactly the same as having a sherry monster, where the dominant character is the sherry. This is exactly the same, although it's just an American oak cask, and to me, it's not what I'm looking for. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Tomintoul. So, sherry butt number 11. Oh, that's a lovely nose. It's so lovely, in fact, that I actually bought some of it. It's got sort of barley, it's got greengage, gooseberry, apricot, dried fruit. It's just wonderfully balanced, and this is just displaying everything that I'm afraid that the previous bottling didn't. It's balanced. Yes, it's got the sherry dried fruit, it's got a bit of spice, and it's a little high toned, I guess, but then that's more down to the alcohol than anything else. But I'm getting sort of, like I said, I'm getting apricot, I'm getting greengage, I'm getting, you know, distillery sort of distillery character. Is kind of more spade character, but at least I'm getting something other than just oak is what I'm trying to say. And that is actually very, very nice. And like I said, you know, this is the sort of sherry cask I like, where the sherry cask is balanced in with the spirit character. Let's see what the parts are. Rich, barleyed, fruity, and again not overwhelmed by the sherry. The sherry is very subtle. It just kind of, it's there. Dried fruit, raisins, sultana, bit of chocolatey spice, bit of coffee. You know, but it's just balanced so well. And the progression is wonderful. Yes, it's a bit drying on the finish, but again, this is 60%. Yeah, I'll probably be having a lie down after all of this, I think. Or lie down before lunch, I think. Yeah, that is lovely. Absolutely gorgeous. That is how I like my sherry casks. Subtle, but noticeable. Balanced. Yeah, that is very, very good. Let's put a little drop of water and see what that does to it. Softer, creamier, more barley, less sherry on the nose now. But again, it's still there in the background. Bit of dried fruit. yeah, I'm getting more sort of milky, oaky notes, more lactones, I guess, which is probably more spirit character than oak character, although you do kind of get those kind of notes from the oak as well. But so again, that is absolutely lovely. Really, very, very pleasant. So it passes like now. Really juicy, succulent. That sort of apricots and dried fruits have just taken on this wonderful, juicy, mouth-watering, succulent character, and it's got a little bit of spice. Wonderfully long, light herbal note right on the finish. Again, that's just stunningly good. I mean, it really is amazingly good, and it's just that's a great sherry cask, you know, because it just doesn't obliterate everything with sherry. It is nuanced, it's balanced, it's just damn good. Okay, so let's move on to the Glentauchers. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Ooh, dear God. Right, now, everything that I said about the previous one, this isn't. It's not subtle. It's a sherry monster, but I will give it that it's got an interesting sherry character. It's not just one-dimensional Oloroso. There's a nuttiness, there's a savouriness. Yes, it's raw. I'm getting cereal. I'm getting... I wouldn't have thought this was Glentauchers. I'm not getting that kind of granity Glentauchers kind of character. But it's an interesting experiment in oak, I suppose. You know, there is a bit of richness underneath there, a bit of banana-y fruit, which is something I would never have associated with Glentauchers at all. I mean, maybe I'm guessing that's coming from the Lagitana cask, and I'm wondering whether it might have been possibly a Fino or an Amontillado or something like that, because it's not got that booming Oloroso kind of character. The original cask may well have been Oloroso, and it's kind of almost sort of fine-tuned the Oloroso, if you see what I mean, by putting it in the Lagitana cask. I know Lagitana is actually pretty well known for its Finos, so it wouldn't surprise me if this was an ex-Fino cask that they finished it in. I mean, yeah, right, like I said, I mean, it's interesting. It is really interesting, and if you like sherry character, it's more than just one-dimensional. Anyway, let's see what the pal's like. Dense, rich, treacly, dry, slightly chocolatey, bit of tannins, lot of alcohol. Less nuanced than the nose, shall we say. There is a aftertaste is quite nice, nutty, and again kind of leading me to suspect that the finishing cask was possibly a Fino or an Amontillado. It's got a real grapey, winey kind of character, it has to be said. Not, like I said, it's not your average booming Oloroso kind of monster. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think maybe on a second tasting, I don't think I was quite so enamoured by it when I first tasted it. I think now maybe with, which is often the case when you revisit whiskies, you sort of maybe see things that you didn't actually see in the first place, you know. And yeah, I can see the appeal of it. Anyway, let's see what those is like now. water doesn't really make a great deal of difference to it, to be honest with you. It's maybe a little less raw. There's maybe a little bit of a soapy note, but it's still pretty herbal. It's maybe a little bit more homogeneously sherried. It maybe doesn't quite have the nuance that it did when it was neat. So we'll pass like. Sweeter, sugarier, less tannic, less bitter. Still not the greatest length in the world. It's still a little short. Yeah, I think if I was gonna sort of drink this, I think I would drink this neat, even though it's, you know, almost 60%. You certainly get a more nuanced kind of sherry character when you're drinking it neat, as opposed to putting a drop of water with it. So I still think the jury's a little bit out on that one, I think. Right, okay, and finally on to the 30-year-old Glengarm. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Yes, and you can quote me on that one. It's just a gorgeous nose. Aromatic, slightly dusty oak. An intimation of sherry, you know, just a touch of subtle dried fruit, oxidised apple, greengage, barley, cinnamon, touch of lemon, more spice. Oh, damn, that's just such a beautiful nose. It's maybe not quite so rigid and uptight as some old Glen Grants can actually be. There is a little bit of a, I mean, you know, whenever I think of Glen Grant, I always think of whatever his name was, the guy that used to own it, when he's, yeah, typically Victorian kind of twirly moustache and all that kind of stuff. And it's always kind of like, I've always kind of thought of it as very upright and Bordeaux-y, I suppose. You know, it's kind of classic old school kind of stuff. But this has got a nice expansive kind of character, a little bit more rounded, I guess. But oh damn, that is good. That is so good. Yeah, it's just got a lovely balance, complexity. That's just one to pour over. But as I've only got a handful of minutes left on the timer, I think I better move on to the palate. That's sublime. That is stunning. I mean, again, like I said, it's got a slightly more expansive character for Glen Grant. Baked apple, cinnamon, touch of treacle, a little bit of coriander, coffee, mature barley, lovely sort of light vanillins. Again, it's got that lovely kind of, you know, straight up down four square kind of character, but again, like I said, it does have that little bit more expansiveness. I mean, it really has a juicy middle, that the finish is just mouth-watering, slightly spicy, mature oak, again dried fruit but not overwhelmingly sherried. In actual fact, the cask is actually pretty subtle, it has to be said, and just kind of adds a slight sort of background dried fruit, because it is just intensely gorgeous. I have one bottle on the shelf, it has to be said, and I should have checked what the price was, but I forgot, and it ain't cheap, and you won't expect that 30-year-old Glen Grant to be cheap, but God, if you want to damn good whiskey that's going to sort of like, you know, give you raptures, then wow, you know, that is a stunning whiskey. And oh, what a finish. Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show. Firstly, a big thank you to A.D Rattray for the samples for today's show. I mean, you know, I hope they think that I've given a sort of an honest appraisal, and certainly it's like everything, you know, it's like, you know, if I really like something, I will buy it and I will stick it on the shelf. The Glenburgie, yeah, it kind of jury's out on that one, it has to be said. I suppose by Glenburgie standards it was okay, but at the end of the day it was relatively straightforward, and like I said, you can see why it's thought of as pretty much as a filler. The Teaninich, yeah, again, you know, it was okay, nothing wrong with it. Like I said, when I was tasting it, personally, I would have just left it for a little bit longer in the oak, just to remove that kind of sort of slight fainty edge to the spirit. And I think if that had been done, I think it would have been, you know, a far more successful bottling. But like I said, at the end of the day, that's just my opinion. The Miltonduff. Well, yes, it was an oak monster, no distillery character whatsoever, and yes, I'm sure there are some of you that kind of love that. Me, not what I want. The Tomintoul 13, I mean, that was just absolutely gorgeous. I mean, that is kind of textbook sherry in my personal opinion, not too intense, nicely balanced. Distillery character, I mean, what more can you ask for, you know? So, you know, to say that I dislike sherry is wrong, you know. I dislike sherry monsters. I like balanced sherry. The Glentauchers, well, that's kind of a bit, for me, it's a bit of a Marmite whiskey, it has to be said. Yeah, neat, I can see the interest in it. Yeah, there was nuance to it within the characteristic of the oak. It's a bit like sort of Octomore, where there's nuance within the peated character. And I suppose to a certain extent you have to, I wouldn't say know what you're looking for, but at least be open to what you're looking for, because you could just smell that and go, yeah, that's lots of sherry, but you would miss out on the nuances of the sherry casks. But and yeah, neat, brilliant, yeah, I can see the point of it. Put a drop of water with it and less interesting. And obviously the star of the show is going to be the Glen Grant. It was always going to be thus, it has to be said. And you know, yeah, there have been a few, I've tasted a few dodgy old Glen Grants in my time, it has to be said, but by and large it's a beautiful whiskey, and it's one of those sort of whiskies that I think I like really young. I mean, the no age statement, Glen Grant, I can't remember the name of it now, even if it has a name, is absolutely lovely. Mid-teens-ish sort of Glen Grant, it all gets a bit sort of like and then it just comes out the other end with age, and you're just going, damn, that's good whiskey. And that's damn good whiskey, it has to be said. So anyway, that's this week's episode of the show in the bag. I hope you've enjoyed it as usual. All that's left to say is, if you want a bottle of this, I have a bottle. Good afternoon.